Sultanate stood before the Orkhon inscriptions deep in Asia, beneath the vast blue sky. Beside her, 4 spiritual leaders, called shamans, chanted 91 hymns to their sky god, directed by their master, Tsem. Sultanate's thoughts were elsewhere. Her cousin Engin had embarked on a lengthy westward journey with his nomadic group to find a new homeland, while her sister, Bilge, rode her horse, aiming for the Black Sea. Sultanate lifted her drum and began to recite a prayer to Tengri to assist her kin in reaching their new destinations. This fictional scene highlights the importance the ancient Turkic and Mongolic peoples placed on Tengriism, an umbrella term for the traditional animistic religion of the eastern steppe nomads. Often wrongly dismissed as primitive, Tengriism is anything but. It is a sophisticated spiritual system with a rich heritage that played a pivotal role in Turkic history, from the earliest records of the Turkic peoples under the Gökturks up through the medieval age. Welcome to our introductory video on the religion of Tengriism and its significance in early Turkic history. The elusive origins of Tengriism. The origins of Tengriism are difficult to trace due to the scarcity of written records from Turkic and Mongolic groups before the 8th century CE. The best documented sources is the version practiced during the Mongol Empire in the 1200 CE, largely because numerous literate civilizations wrote extensively about the Mongols during that time, for obvious reasons. However, it would be incorrect to assume that the Tengriism practiced by Genghis Khan and his successors was identical to the faith practiced by Turkic and Mongolic peoples centuries earlier. In addition to its unclear genesis, our understanding of Tengriism is hampered by the misconception that it was purely a form of shamanism, a broad term where religious specialists called shamans communicate with the spirit world. This is not entirely accurate, as archaeological findings in Kazakhstan and Siberia indicate that Tengrist rituals were performed not just by spiritual experts, but by ordinary members of the tribe. From this, we can deduce that shamans were involved in Tengrist religious life, but were not the sole authorities of the faith. Shamans should be viewed as professionals consulted for specific tasks, such as fortune-telling and healing illnesses. During periods when Tengrist nomads controlled large empires, the Khan himself was the most vital link to the spiritual realm. Despite the misunderstandings surrounding Tengriism and the gaps in its developmental record, a general statement can be made. Early Turkic and Mongolic peoples adhered to a collection of beliefs centered on a deity known as Tengri, or the eternal blue sky. The earliest concrete evidence for Tengriism comes from what are perhaps the oldest inscriptions related to Turkic peoples. The Orkhon inscriptions, named for the valley in Mongolia where they were discovered. These stones contain various writings on different subjects. In one section, dated to approximately 865 CE, a leader named Bilge Khagan recounts his achievements and his divine lineage to Tengri. The deity is mentioned repeatedly in passages such as this. When the blue sky above and the dark earth below were made, then were made between them both the sons of men. Over the sons of men set themselves as rulers my forebears Bumen Khagan and Istemi Khagan, and having set themselves as rulers, they governed and kept in order the Turkic people's kingdoms and polity. All the peoples in the 4 quarters of the world were foes to them, but they waged wars against them and overcame all the peoples in the 4 quarters of the world, made them keep the peace, and bowed their heads and bent their knees. Towards the east, they made them settle as far as the mountain forest of Kadir Khan, to the west as far as Tamir Kapig. Over so great a distance did they rule between these 2 extremes, bringing order to the Gökturks, who were without lord and without any tribal organization. This inscription unequivocally establishes a divine link between the Khagan and the sky god Tengri, granting him the divine legitimacy to rule. It also suggests that early Turkic people considered Tengri's blessings essential for effective governance.
The connection between ruling Khagans and the eternal blue sky was a concept maintained by successive Turkic and Mongolic dynasties until their eventual conversion to various forms of Christianity, Islam, and Buddhism. Tengriism was incorporated into the royal titles of many Turkic and Mongolic states. The rulers of the Uyghur Khaganate in the 8th and 9th century CE were particularly fond of such divine titulature. Titles for their khans included Tengri Khagan and Tengri Ilig, meaning heaven/God, and heaven prince, respectively. Little more can be inferred from the late antique period of Turkic and Mongolic history. We have evidence from archaeological excavations showing the use of small statuettes in household religious rituals, likely relating to fertility, family, and controlling forest spirits to protect sacred land. While ancient findings offer limited detailed information, it does appear that the old Turkic beliefs, known as Tengriism, were cosmologically and ritually rich.
The Turco-Mongolic cosmology. We will now explore the mythology of Tengriism, specifically its deities and supernatural view of the world. Deciphering the early Turk-Mongolic cosmology is difficult and relies on approximations drawn from modern Turkic and Mongolic tribes in the Siberia region who still practice forms of Tengriism today, though their practices may have deviated from those of their early ancestors. Generally, the cosmos in Tengriism is centered on the sky deity known as Kok Tengri, and later as Kormusta Tengri. Tengri has been interpreted by historians as a supreme deity, similar to the Father God in a polytheistic structure, or as the literal manifestation of the blue sky. Some have even proposed Tengri was a monotheistic god, akin to Ahura Mazda in the Zoroastrian faith, or the god of the Abrahamic religions. The latter interpretation was mainly promoted by medieval Christian and Muslim historians seeking to align Tengriism with their own faiths, and is questioned by many contemporary scholars. In the Turkic mythological view, Kok Tengri commands the blue sky, under which the Proto-Turks roamed the steppes, and from whom Khans derived their legitimacy to rule. In some regional variations of Tengriism, Tengri has a wife named Umai, who oversees fertility and welfare. In the Mongol versions of the myth, Tengri's spouse is named Nachigai Eke, or the Earth Mother. Little else is known about her, but some modern Turkic tribes, like the Khakas of Siberia, associate birch trees with her as connections to heaven. Many other deities and spirits exist in modern Turkic myths, such as the creator deity Ak-Ana, associated with water, or the fire deity Ot-Ata. As is typical for cultures where the horse was central to life, the Turks and Mongols placed special importance on equestrian-related deities. For example, they worshipped a war god known as Daisud Tengri. Daisud Tengri shared a name with the sky god Tengri because he was considered to belong to the highest echelon of supernatural beings. He is always depicted mounted on a horse and continued to be venerated even after many Mongol tribes adopted Tibetan Buddhism from the 17th century onwards. Turkic and Mongolic mythologies often emphasize naturalistic elements. Indeed, for many modern Turkic tribes who still practice aspects of Tengriism, the animal and human worlds are not as strictly separated as in the Western worldview. The most famous illustration of this is the myth of the blue wolf. In this story, a human and a wolf reproduce, yielding the ancestors of the many Turkic tribes of antiquity. The human participant may be male or female depending on the Turkic group recounting the tale. The most famous version involves the she-wolf Asina finding a boy who survived a battle and nursing him back to health. The young man then impregnates her, and she gives birth to 10 half-men, half-wolves who founded the 10 tribes of the famous Gökturk Confederacy, which dominated the Eurasian steppe from the 6th to 8th century CE. This myth likely served to justify the rule of the elite Gökturk leadership among their tribal kin. Chinggis Khan of the Mongol Empire also used the wolf myth for legitimacy, claiming a blue wolf named Koke Chino and a fallow doe, or Gua Murl, as ancestors. Additionally, the Turks and Mongols engaged in ancestor worship at household shrines, and among royalty, these ancestors were sometimes deified.
they prayed to their ancestors for guidance in daily life. Whether someone was performing a ritualistic act like smashing the cup of happiness in front of their love in the Volga River, or simply writing a letter to their beloved by the shores of the Crimean Peninsula, they always hoped their ancestors would lead them to prosperity. Tengriism in Mongol history. As the second millennium CE began, the beliefs of Tengriism evolved in line with the political goals of the greatest land empire in world history, that of the Mongols. This empire, founded at the beginning of the 12th century CE, famously became the largest contiguous land empire ever, stretching from deep within southern China to the steppes of southern Russia. Much like his Turco-Mongol predecessors, Chinggis Khan invoked his divine connection to Tengri to justify his role as overlord of the Mongols, and Tengrism remained a central tenet of Mongol ideology for many of his successor dynasties. Our knowledge of Tengrism during this period is much richer than earlier times, due to the abundance of written records about the Mongol Empire. However, it is also highly filtered through the perspectives of the Christian, Muslim, and Buddhist chroniclers who produced those records. Modern scholars, such as the late Shagdalen Bira, argue that during the Mongol Empire's rule, Tengrism transitioned from an ethno-religion of the Turkic and Mongol peoples into a universal faith used to justify the rule of this massive empire and its successors. Consequently, Tengri was elevated to a universal deity, whose control over the sky granted the Mongols the right to control the entire world. The Khan was presented as an incarnation of Tengri himself, making him the source of power and imperial control over his domain. Tengrism functioned as an imperial cult that was simultaneously religiously tolerant. For example, many ethnic Mongol factions within the Mongol Empire were not Tengrists. The Karaids, notably, were Assyrian Christians. This Tengrist royal ideology could readily align itself with any religious tradition encountered in the regions conquered by the Mongols. In the Yuan Mongol-ruled dynasty of China, Tengrism integrated with Buddhist ideals of kingship, such as the concept of the universal wheel-turning monarch who brings order to the world. Yuan Mongol rulers like Kublai Khan found it easy to practice Tibetan Buddhism while simultaneously using Tengrism in official declarations to assert themselves as universal rulers. The Mongol elite also leveraged Tengri in their diplomatic communications. The 1246 letter of Guyuk Khan, sent to Pope Innocent IV, included invocations to eternal Tengri in both Mongolian and Turkic, demanding the Catholic Church's submission. In 1262, Hulagu Khan of the Mongol Ilkhanate sent a letter to King Louis IX of France. In this letter, Hulagu stated that he treated Christians in his realm respectfully, to secure an alliance with Catholic European states against the Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt. The letter to King Louis portrayed Hulagu as a crusader against Saracens fighting in the name of eternal Tengri, which the Latin translator rendered as the living God. This exchange indicates that Tengrism was an essential tool for the Mongols to demonstrate their authority to monotheistic states. Many Mongol rulers encountered Christianity, Buddhism, Manichaeism, and Islam through intermarriages within their own families. Thus, this increasing emphasis on a more monotheistic presentation of Tengrism was likely fueled by foreign influences and the political need to effectively communicate with other nations. Ultimately, the Tengrism of the Mongol Empire and its successor states was profoundly shaped by 13th century Mongol imperialism, evolving into a more unitary religion used to advance the interests of the elite.
Tengriism, Islamization, and Buddhistization. The 13th century marked both the peak and the initial stages of Tengrism's decline as a major world religion. During this era, the Turks and Mongols in various states began converting to other faiths, such as Islam and Buddhism. This is too broad a subject for a single video, but we will offer some key examples of how this process unfolded. In the case of Islam, many scholars initially theorized that the Turkic tribes converted through Sufis, Islamic mystics whose practices sometimes appeared similar to those of Tengrist shamans.
This theory was first proposed to explain the conversion of the Turks and Mongols in the Ilkhanate in the 14th century CE. However, the parallels between Sufi mystics and Tengrist shamans are often exaggerated, as was their actual role in converting the Turks and Mongols to Islam. Today, many scholars believe this was a myth spread by the Sufis themselves in the 15th century to bolster their own legitimacy, and that most of the conversion work was done by Muslim jurists in West Asia. Turkic and Mongol conversions to Islam were neither uniform nor simple. For example, an initial conversion of the Mongol Ilkhanate elite to Islam was temporarily reversed by Khan Arghun. Arghun was not hostile to the Islamic faith, keeping many Muslim officials in his court, but he may have represented an elite faction that viewed conversion as politically problematic. Nonetheless, the overall historical trajectory for the Turkic and Mongol dynasties ruling over Persia and the Middle East was one of conversion to Islam. Regarding Buddhism, the story differs somewhat. Buddhism is more flexible than Christianity or Islam, as it acknowledges the existence of deities and spirits from other regions. Buddhism's primary strategy when spreading to a new area was domestication, which involved integrating local spirits and deities into the Buddhist pantheon of bodhisattvas and other spirits. These spirits and some of their rituals were then incorporated into a Buddhist context. A version of this process manifested in Mongolia proper, where the Mongols became deeply engaged with the Vajrayana form of Buddhism found in Tibet. The conversion to Buddhism in the Mongol heartland accelerated in the 16th century CE. Mongol rulers such as Altan Khan formed official alliances with the third Dalai Lama of Tibet and began using Buddhism to assert their authority. The Dalai Lama was the head of the rising Gelug Buddhist school in Tibet. In fact, it was Altan Khan who first bestowed the title of Dalai Lama on the third Dalai Lama, who then retroactively applied it to his two predecessors. Equipped with conversion skills, Buddhist monks from Tibet spent much of the 17th century traveling across Mongolia, where they started taking over some of the local shamans' roles in areas like medicine and divination. Many deities and spirits worshipped in Tengriism, such as Tengri Bogu, became deities within the Buddhist framework. State-led purges of Tengriism by Buddhist rulers also occurred in Mongolia, and were often quite violent. Thus, by the 17th and 18th centuries, Buddhism had largely assimilated Tengriism. Seeking through faith to reach the truth, the Mongols became a stronghold of Buddhism in Inner Asia. Tengriism's survival and revival in the modern era. With the shift of the Turks and Mongols toward Islam, Buddhism, and Christianity, Tengriism became a marginal faith in Central Asia and the Middle East. Many Turkic and Mongolic tribes in the remote northern regions of Siberia continued to practice forms of the faith, such as the Sakha people in the modern-day Sakha Republic of Russia. Their beliefs, documented as shamanic by early Russian colonists and anthropologists, survived into the 19th century and beyond, despite attempts by the Russian Empire to convert them to Orthodox Christianity. The state atheism of the Soviet Union in the 20th century also negatively impacted these Tengrist peoples, but the faiths of the Siberian peoples have endured in a diminished form to this day. In Mongolia and its neighbors Buryatia and Tuva, remnants of Tengriism survived into the 20th century, were repressed under the communist regime, and re-emerged with the transition to capitalism in the early 1990s. In Central and West Asia, the situation is more complex. In Turkey, the rise of Turkish nationalism in the early 20th century involved attempts to re-emphasize connections to Tengrist myths like that of the she-wolf Asina, to separate the Turkish identity from the influence of Islam and the Middle East. Turkish nationalism ultimately used this mythology in a secular context to construct a national ideology that replaced the Ottoman Turkish identity after the Turkish War of Independence. Tengriism itself was not revived as a religion, but the visual imagery of wolves remains prominent in Turkish nationalist circles to this day. In Central Asia and the Volga region, the dominance of Islam and later the state atheism of the USSR left little room for Tengriism. The fall of communism in 1989 led some Central Asian intellectuals to use Tengriism not as a religious revivalist movement, but as an attempt to assert an identity independent from the former Soviet Union and modern-day Russia. As of the 21st century, there have been some small revivalist movements of Tengriism, though they have not achieved widespread success. The main exceptions are the revival of the faith among certain Siberian indigenous groups, as well as the Republic of Tatarstan in Russia's Volga region. The cultural footprint of the Tengrist religion can be observed in modern music, such as the famous Mongolian band The Who and the indigenous Siberian folk band Otikhin from Russia. Thus, while Tengriism is not a major world religion today, it lives on in the cultural memory of Turkic cultures globally. Conclusion. Months after her visit to Orkhan, Sultanad rode her horse across the Kazakh steppes. She had successfully led her tribe to the Caspian Sea, and it was time to establish a new home. She was accompanied by her friends, Guliz, Zemfira, and Dostan. Together they raised a totem to their many gods. As the sun set and the stars began to shine beneath the full moon, they began chanting, hoping their new home would be prosperous and enduring. For the Turkic peoples, this captured the essence of their ancient Tengrist faith. In the endless emerald fields of the steppes, where the journeys were long and endless, the sapphire skies often provided solace. Their many gods and spirits, who managed their lives, were a pathway for spiritual and intellectual growth. This faith is deeply intertwined with the roots of Turkic history and its original environment, and it is as captivating as the endless sky where Tengri resides. More videos of the lesser-known religions of world history are on the way, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see it. Please consider liking, subscribing, commenting, and sharing. It helps immensely.